Anastasia, yes, daily practice helps to recognize and adjust yourself in the process of your spiritual journey. If you content yourself only with theory, this is like marking time, wasting life's valuable moments. As the ancients used to say, the one who soars towards spiritual summits gets ahead of the one who walks the path. One who walks gets ahead of the one who crawls along the way of knowledge. And the one crawling gets ahead of the one who stands still. To make the first step means to start moving forward towards comprehending yourself. Rigdon, quite true. The very first steps in spiritual direction have been described in your previous books. And before telling the readers about the next stage of more in-depth work on yourself, which is the pyramid meditation, I should first talk about a simple but useful meditation intended for knowing your four essences. Different peoples called it differently at different times. For example, in ancient times the Slavs, long before the advent of Christianity and introduction of this religion into the consciousness of this nation, called it Chetverik, and it was one of the basic initial practices in the process of self-perfection along man's spiritual path. Anastasia, do you mean the meditation intended for conscious perception of one's four essences? This is indeed a rather effective meditation which is aimed at knowing yourself, revealing particular qualities of daily work of one's essences and their influence on consciousness through thoughts and emotional states. Rigdon, this simple meditation is, in fact, the first step towards getting consciously acquainted with your essences. While mastering it, a person learns not only to control his emotional states but also to understand the real cause of their emergence. As a rule, in usual life, the person does not notice or keep track of why he is suddenly overwhelmed by various, changeable like the weather, moods, and emotions, anger, or aggression, and slyness accompanied by selfishness, or fear, or sudden memories of the past with their burden of negativity, and so on. At best, the person identifies such states in himself as an evident manifestation of the animal nature which has already fully captured his consciousness. He begins to suffer from this vicious circle of thoughts and emotions, at the same time strengthening them with his attention. In other words, he does not trace the initial provocation from the lateral essences. Whereas this meditation helps to develop skills, which make it possible not only to track this process but also to stop it in time, that is, to terminate it before the state completely engulfs man. So, this meditation is not only very effective but, what is equally important, especially for beginners, it is easy to learn since it is similar to a psychotechnique. The purpose of this meditation is to learn to understand the moments of activation of each of the four essences, feel them deeply, identify emotional surges accompanying this activation, and also to understand the nature of manifestation of various thoughts which have been caused by this process and which subsequently affect the change of mood. The meditation is done in the standing position. The meditator imagines himself standing in the center of the base of a small four-sided pyramid, that is, he is located in the median center of the space divided in the form of a diagonal cross, and each part of that space will, in fact, represent a field of one of the four essences. I shall make some clarifications. The square base of the pyramid is conditionally divided with diagonal lines, that is, in the form of the letter X, by a diagonal cross, into four equal parts. The meditator is located at the center of the intersection of the lines of the cross which conditionally divides the space around the person into four parts that have volume. In short, in front of the meditator as well as behind and on each side of him, there are triangular-like spaces. This is approximately how the fields of the four essences will look like in the human understanding. Now, I shall specify the location of the center of each essence. The centers of these essences in these triangular spaces are located approximately at a distance a little further than an arm stretched out in the horizontal direction towards each of the four sides. The energy center of each essence conditionally represents a kind of a bundle, let us say, which resembles a ball or a small sphere in form and in consistency, figuratively speaking, something like a gas planet. A small sphere is a symbolic representation of the center of each essence, to better learn and easily understand this meditation. Actually, This is a complex structure. Such a figurative comparison with a sphere is similar to perceiving the human structure in the first dimension when it looks like a dot. But from the highest dimensions, the human structure is already perceived, in all its multidimensionality, as a complex energy structure. It is the same thing with the centers of these essences. They are spheres conditionally for the resident of a three-dimensional world's understanding. So, we calm our thoughts, emotions, and immerse into a meditative state. Breathing is regular and easy. We open the hand chakrans which are located in the center of the palms. We breathe in, letting in the chi, translator's note, energy, the energy of air, through the hand chakrans, and raise it along the arms to the shoulder level. When we exhale, we move the chi, air, energy from shoulders down along the lateral meridians, located approximately at the sides of the body, and join the two flows in the hara chakran, located approximately 3 fingers widths below the navel, filling our lower abdomen with this energy like a bowl with water. Then, after filling it, some people will imagine it mentally at the first stages while others will have a sensation of slight heaviness in the lower abdomen. We move the accumulated energy from the lower abdomen up along the spine into the head, particularly into the hypothalamic region of the between brain, diencephalon, translator's note, the ancient structures of the brain which are located almost in the center of the head. This place, the center of the head, will be a kind of a median center, to which the meditator will be constantly returning in this meditation. Anastasia, here, I would like to mention 2 interesting points, which you once told us about. First, it is no coincidence that filling the hara chakran is often associated with filling a bowl with water. When translated from Japanese, the word hara means stomach. While the earlier Sanskrit word hara, as you said, represented in ancient Indian treatises one of the names of the supreme creating power of the feminine principle, the goddess Shakti. Water and a bowl in the context of the primordial knowledge about man had an allegorical meaning which indicated the powers and processes acting in spiritual practices. Secondly, regarding this meditation in particular. Back then, you drew our attention to the fact that the meditator concentrates on breathing only in the beginning as everyday process that is usual to him, before filling the lower abdomen with energy. However, later he simply shifts his attention to the energy moving along the spine and to tracking the subsequent process of the meditation while breathing already takes place naturally, automatically. At the time, these clarifications helped me to understand the first steps related to mastering this meditation. Rigdon, correct. During the meditation, breathing must be relaxed and natural, and all the attention must be focused on the processes that are happening at this moment. So, naturally, at the beginning, just like in any other meditation, all feelings must be in balance, in a state of peace. Accordingly, all 4 essences of a person will also be in the neutral, unexcited state. The meditator senses them as if simultaneously. The centers of the essences are like big balls, suns, planets, and so forth. You can imagine all this whichever way you like at the beginning. Over time, while practicing this meditation, the person will learn to feel how they work according to his own inner sensations. And having gained his own relevant experience, it will no longer be necessary for him to have these images, for another stage of knowing yourself will then begin. Anastasia, yes, I've noticed such a peculiarity based on my initial experience of mastering spiritual practices. When you listen for the first time how to do a new meditation, 1,000 questions come from the mind about how exactly to do it. Now I understand why you always give such diverse associative comparisons and clarifications while explaining a new meditation. These are clarifications for the mind so that the material brain could at least understand something at first and simply grasp a general scheme of meditation. In other words, this is an attempt to explain to a person, whose consciousness is currently operating in the mode of perception of 3-dimensional space, those phenomena which will take place during the meditation when his consciousness switches to the mode of perceiving other dimensions, or rather, the parts of his structure which are located in other dimensions. After all, when you do the meditation itself, everything turns out to be very simple and clear, because you do it with your deepest feelings. Moreover, in an altered state of consciousness, when you have an extended perception of the world and typical self-analysis of a resident of the three-dimensional space is switched off. Rigden, undoubtedly, all the dimensions are interconnected and influence one another. This is also true for the 6 dimensions in which the multilayer human energy structure is located. In order to understand the phenomena that take place in dimensions higher than the 3rd, a person needs meditative experience and real changes, shall we say, at least in his basic worldview and daily work on himself. Only then will he be able to understand what the world really is and what secrets it hides in itself. When man gets his own experience, he will no longer need thousands of words or different explanations from the mind, hinting at a manifestation of this or that phenomenon will be enough for him to identify it and understand what happens and how. By the way, I shall note another piece of information as food for thought regarding the structures of the brain that are involved in this meditation. The between brain is a kind of collector of all types of sensitivities. It participates directly in the processes of regulating memory, sleep, instinctive behavior, psychical reactions, correction of different kinds of sensitivity, and so on. For instance, what does the hypothalamus represent, which is a part of the between brain, weighing only about 5 grams? The hypothalamus contains the most important centers of the vegetative nervous system. In general, it is there that the coordination of functions of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic centers of the vegetative nervous system takes place, on which, one can say, the whole body is based. The hypothalamus controls main processes of homeostasis, that is, it supports the dynamic equilibrium of the internal environment during changes of external conditions by means of coordinated reactions. Moreover, medulla oblongata, among other things, also contains the center of the main nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, the longest of all the cranial nerves, the vagus nerve, nervus vagus, the branches of which participate in the formation of the solar plexus as well. But let us get back to the meditation. It is from the center of the brain, the conditional, median center, from the above-mentioned hypothalamic area of the between brain, and further through certain points of his head, that the meditator carries the energy, which he had accumulated in hara and moved along the spine to the brain, to the center of each essence. So, a person artificially activates his essences, thus generating in himself different initial emotional surges, and studies them at the same time. The task of the meditator is to learn to recognize the work of each of his essences, the result of which is manifested in daily life as certain emotional surges and thoughts. Let us take a closer look at the process of a person's interaction with each of his main essences during the meditation. At first, the meditator works with the right essence. In the process of the meditation, the chi energy goes from the hypothalamic area of the between brain through the right amygdaloid nucleus located deep inside the temporal lobe of the brain. Next, through the point located above the right ear, the energy goes directly to the sphere center of the right essence. For those who do not know the structure of their brain, I shall note that the human brain contains 2 amygdaloid nuclei located on the right and on the left sides. This is a very interesting subcortical brain structure, which is related to the formation of various kinds of emotions. Anastasia, yes, as of today, science is already aware of the fact that amygdaloid nuclei are responsible for the human ability to read information from faces of surrounding people. Thus, a person subconsciously understands how these people feel at the moment. But the information reading mechanism itself is still not entirely clear to scientists. Rigden, understandably, since this reading, like many other functions of the amygdaloid nuclei, is connected to the work of the lateral essences of human in his energy structure. In the physical body, the functions of amygdaloid nuclei are related to vegetative emotional reactions, provision of defensive behavior, and motivation of conditional reflex behavior. Moreover, as of today, it has been established scientifically that damaging the amygdaloid nucleus can cause partial disappearance of the structures responsible for rage and aggression, as well as for the memory of danger. In other words, this may lead to a partial disappearance of fear in a person, which will expose him to constant danger, of which he will be unaware. Medicine has even known attempts of treating fears and uncontrolled surges of aggression by means of surgical destruction of the amygdaloid nucleus. I want to note that the end does not always justify the means of achieving it. Victory over oneself is much more important than any surgical intervention. Especially, since a person still won't be able to get rid of all his fears and manifestations of the animal nature. Actually, the human body has no extra parts, so one should not remove anything from it unless it is absolutely necessary. And, a couple more words about the point above the ear. This area also has the structures, which are connected to the human structure at the level of energy, that take part in the process of perception by a person in an altered state of consciousness of spatial correlations, or, more precisely, of his orientation in the spaces of different dimensions. The four essences are also involved in this process. Although a certain phenomenon is present here. For these essences, space and time do not exist in the way in which they are perceived by the resident of three-dimensional space. Yet it is thanks to the work of the essences that a person conceives an intuitively accurate sense of orientation in time and space. Of course, earlier people did not know such details about the connection between the human energy structure and physical structures of the brain. Nevertheless, those who practiced this meditation in ancient times did it just as successfully. Ancient people simply imagined a breath of wind at this stage of meditation pass first through the center of the head, then through its external points to specific places in space, thanks to which certain actions took place there. For instance, in the ancient Russian spiritual practices, this process was presented as spinning of a vortex, as a contact with the masters of the four winds that were endowed with properties of the four seasons, winter, summer, autumn, and spring. The last one, endowed with characteristics of the front essence, was revered the most by the ancient Slavs. Anastasia, are you saying this means that a person doesn't have to know the structure of the brain thoroughly in order to do this meditation well? Rigdon, yes, but for overall intellectual development, this knowledge is useful. Afterwards, the practical experience of doing this meditation can simply be used in everyday life to observe in yourself the initial processes of origin of negative thoughts and emotions and, consequently, to prevent their undesirable development in time. Eventually, this process of work on yourself becomes a habit, for instance, like walking. After all, at first person learns to keep his balance, then to move legs, and then this process becomes a part of a daily habit. As a result, he no longer pays attention to how he moves in space. He simply uses the result of his earlier work to do certain everyday tasks. The same applies to the experience of practicing this meditation. By controlling the emergence or surge of his emotional states in each day, a person preserves his attention and life energy unspent for more significant spiritual tasks. And without such control, he usually unconsciously wastes this energy on programs and the will of the animal mind, allowing negative thoughts and emotions to dominate in his consciousness. So, here is how the inner work with the center of the right essence happens. Usually, in his everyday life, a person does not notice any of his essences activate, though he certainly feels the result of such activation. When the lateral essences start working, the person's mood can suddenly change, moreover, for no apparent reason. A person becomes depressed, or the feeling of fear, disappointment, grief, and apathy washes over him, or, on the contrary, aggression and long-standing grudges begin to emerge, and so on. Why does this happen? Because the lateral essences activate, in this case, it is the right essence. Then, the essence triggers the formation of thoughts that correspond to this emotional surge and captures person's attention with them. Like a skillful manipulator, it catches him at the point of hypersensitivity, so to speak, offering him a choice of different versions of thoughts, though in one and the same emotional tone. In other words, when animal nature dominates in a person, the lateral essences in their usual mode of operation provoke such emotional surges in the personality. And what do such surges mean for the human brain? They are basically a sort of a code which activates certain blocks of memory which store the once gained experience of such mental worries, emotions, and states. Having opened the memory storerooms and captured the person's attention with their contents, the lateral essences thus pull the person into a negative state. Then the process of strengthening the mood in this direction ensues, a kind of a looping on one and the same thoughts. As a result, the person himself, by his choice of applying the power of attention, wastes the life energy on thoughts of the animal nature, thus nourishing one or the other of his essences which had triggered these emotional surges. And the essence, for its part, strengthens its influence on the person through his own resource of attention. So, even though the person seems to want to escape such, for example, depressive or aggressive state, however, in reality, he is just not able to get rid of it. Why? Because he has already allowed this state inside himself with his own choice, by mulling over these thoughts which kept him looped in this state. And he cannot abandon it because he does not actually want to give up these negative thoughts, ignore them in his consciousness, and avoid them in the future. For they deeply affect his pride, megalomania, the feeling of his own significance, or other soup kit from the standard repertoire of the animal nature. When the animal nature dominates in human consciousness, the lateral essences constantly try to distract the personality's attention from the main thing, focusing on spiritual liberation. And if we take this frequently recurring process on the scale of the entire life, then it turns out that such trifles of psychological excessive self-blame constantly draw man's attention away from attaining the main goal of his life. Moreover, they contribute to the fact that a person falls into an illusion of existence and does not understand the real reason of why he is actually living here and now, in these conditions, why he is imprisoned in this temporary, mortal body. Unfortunately, it often happens that life flies by very quickly, and a person does not even have time to understand why he was actually born, what the power of his attention has been spent on, and on what trifles and trinkets, empty desires, arguments, struggle for leadership, and so on, he has wasted his precious reserve of life energy. Anastasia, yes, previously I would also often experience such a looping of thoughts and worries in this regard, such an unnoticeable, or rather, usual for me, focus of attention on some empty little things of life, resentments, disappointments, aggression, or satisfaction of feeling of self-significance, which at that point of time seemed very important to me. But later I realized that the main thing for me was to know myself and my nature in order to understand at the right time what exactly is happening to me and how to prevent or adjust this process. As you once advised, in practice what helps to abandon this pettiness of existence is a global view from the perspective of your observer from the spiritual nature, a real understanding of the transience of life and of the priority of certain questions for your true self, that is, for your spiritual nature. Rigden, to put it simply, an expanded state of consciousness. That is right. And a narrowed state of consciousness is exactly typical for the work of the animal nature, so to speak, of materialization of one's consciousness. For example, why does depression arise? Because of active work of the right essence. In such cases, a person tries to seclude himself, to run away from society, as they say, he whimpers alone. And if such stereotypical influence continues long enough, it can even drive a person to suicide, which, by the way, is what the Kentucks make use of. And no antidepressants will help here. How can the situation be helped by chemical substances which influence only the processes of the coarse matter of three-dimensional world if the whole point is about a similar influence taking place at the level of subtle energies? On the other hand, it is quite within the power of each person to stop these phenomena in himself. And it is not that difficult to do if, of course, one knows how. But let us get back to the meditation technique itself. So, the meditator takes a breath and upon exhalation, the energy goes from the center of the head, the ancient structures of the brain, through the point located above the right ear to the spherical center of his right essence. The spherical center of the right essence starts rotating counterclockwise. Let me emphasize that the movement of the centers of the right and the left essences happens namely counterclockwise. This is simply physics. Person's notion that they rotate clockwise is already a game of his imagination. At first, spinning the sphere counterclockwise occurs at the level of imagination. But subsequently, the meditator begins to feel both the rotation of the center and a clear sense of the sphere of the right essence as dense and hot. Thus, a person artificially activates the center of the right essence. The latter starts its usual work, the one. That takes place when the animal nature dominates in an individual's consciousness. Each person has had moments in life when, while experiencing fear or great concern, he felt feverish or, the opposite, he felt too cold. Physiologists attribute this to a reaction of the vegetative system. But the nature of this phenomenon lies much deeper, at the level of the physics of the invisible world. So, the objective of the meditator is to feel various emotional surges, which are typical for the work of this essence, in order to recognize them later on in everyday sensations and to stop them at the very beginning of their emergence. During this meditation, a person, on the one hand, kind of relives this full range of sensations anew and, on the other hand, he observes the situation in its initial stages as an observer from the spiritual nature. That is, he sees the animal nature's activation which is hidden from him in the usual daily routine, so to speak, he sees preparation for an offensive, for an attack. In other words, the meditator keeps track of the situation, what particular emotional surges trigger the emergence of an oppressive state of consciousness, what feelings arise then, what thoughts awaken anger and aggression, what life episodes and associations come up in this connection, and so on. All this takes place through reliving this negative state. Of course, sensations will hardly be pleasant. At first, a sense of mild anxiety will appear, then anger, aggression, or fear may arise, or a state of oppression, or a sense of past resentment. The more energy, the chi during breathing, the person will put into the center of the right essence, the more heat he will sense from this sphere, and the stronger the negative feelings will become. Anastasia, it should be mentioned that the people who do this meditation for the first time often make the following mistakes. Knowing what kind of unpleasant emotions are expected to manifest, and everyone is usually aware of their skeletons in the closet, at the first stages of learning this meditation, they can block themselves from such emotions consciously or subconsciously. As a result, at their first attempts, people practically do not sense anything, or at best they sense warmth or cold from the sphere centers themselves during their rotation. Rigdon, that is correct. It is just that when a person understands that he is about to experience an unpleasant state, the person may subconsciously block himself from the manifestation of these sensations. The animal nature does not like to give up its key positions. The meditator should be aware of this and try to do the meditation as diligently as possible, and not engage in passing the time by lulling himself into a false sense of security with the thoughts that probably I'm such a good, highly spiritual individual, and nothing negative happens with me. This meditation is performed in order for a person to actually feel those states at the physical and psychological levels, feel those emotional surges that each of his essences generates. Thus, he will learn to recognize the very moment of the beginning of an attack of his animal nature, the emergence of these emotional surges, their influence and manifestation in everyday life. He will begin to understand where the root of all evil and the negative state, which has suddenly washed over him, come from. He will learn to detect and identify the state in himself and, most importantly, to control and prevent such attacks as well as the situation going from bad to worse. And if while learning this meditation in practice, instead of really working on himself, a person is going to be lazy or will simply find comfort in the illusion of his megalomania, then it will be very difficult for him in his daily life. Because the animal nature will be fully prepared to use its entire secret arsenal while the person will not know how to resist it. Many people, in such cases, attribute all these attacks to their external circumstances or to other people, thus only intensifying the uncontrolled activity of their animal nature. But time passes, people and circumstances change in their lives, while attacks remain the same. Why? Because all the problems are inside the person. As man gets to know himself, he gets rid of his mental problems. The cause is not in the outer but in the inner. While studying yourself, you need to learn to understand also the people around you, which means to learn to be kind. Anastasia, it is an irrefutable fact, when you yourself change, your attitude towards the world around you changes, too. Yes, there is a big difference between what a person expects in his ideas coming from the mind at the beginning of practicing meditation techniques and what happens in reality. This is like in the example with a lemon. If a person imagines a lemon, this can at best cause increased salivation in him. But if he tastes it, he will have a whole range of sensations. Rigden, that is right, it is the same thing here. One should not just imagine a hypothetical presence of these emotions but really feel them. But let us go back to the meditation itself. After the meditator has felt the influence of his right essence, he calms his thoughts and feelings once again. There is a very important point that needs to be learned. The person mentally stops the movement of this rotating spherical center of the right essence. At the first stages of learning, he can imagine this process as he likes, for instance, that he mentally stops the spinning of the sphere with a hand or by a thought command. Then the meditator, as the observer, returns to the conditional median center in his head. There, he once again feels the state of peace and quiet, the neutral position of all four essences simultaneously. At this time, residual phenomena may still be felt, which will manifest themselves both at the physical level as unpleasant heat from the right sphere, as if from fire, and at the level of sensory emotional surges, such as, for instance, anger and irritation. This background, after some time, quickly fades away as soon as the person purposefully switches attention to the subsequent processes of the meditation. Anastasia, yes, it is one thing to conscientiously spin this sphere, but it's more important to learn to stop it. I know from practical experience that in everyday life, until a person masters and starts noticing the beginning of the animal nature's attack, it is important for him to at least learn to prevent its further development. That is, once you notice already an obvious manifestation of the animal nature, then at least you shouldn't focus your attention on strengthening obsessive emotions, feelings, and thoughts. In other words, one must not get involved in this process, stimulated by the animal nature, or participate in this battle against yourself at the expense of your own power and resources. Rigden, that is true. Any battle begins on the battlefield of the human mind. One who can tame his anger is like a sage who has won his battle before it even began. So, the next stage of the meditation. After the meditator has restored the state of inner calm, he once again switches his attention to breathing and repeats the scheme of the beginning of the meditation, that is, he fills hara, lower abdomen, with chi energy through the chakrans of his hands. Then he once again moves this energy along the spine to the ancient center of the brain, the conditional median center. But now he directs the energy from this center to the left amygdaloid nucleus through the point located above the left ear to the spherical center of the left essence. And then he begins to work with his left essence, artificially rotating the center of the left essence counterclockwise by means of focusing his attention and thought. The task is to feel the beginning of activation of this essence, what emotional surges it generates, which create the corresponding mood. As a rule, the person gets the following range of surges: a sense of false pride, self-love, temptation, increased libido, a desire to have secret power over others, and so on. There may appear corresponding images related to these feelings, to megalomania, lack of restraint, sexual desires from the perspective of domination of the alpha male, or the alpha female, of the so-called lust based on egocentrism, greed, the desire to possess someone or something. While during the rotation of the center of the right essence, The sensation of heat may be felt, then during the rotation of the spherical center of the left essence, one will be able to feel an increasing sense of cold coming from it. After experiencing all the emotional surges of his left essence, the meditator calms his emotions once again. He mentally stops the rotation of the spherical center of this essence. Then he returns as an observer to the conditional median center of his consciousness, to the neutral position. He focuses on the state of calm and silence and feels the neutral position of all four essences simultaneously. The physiological sensation of cold, the residual unpleasant emotions, and the feelings generated by the activity of the left essence may still issue background activity for some time. After this, the meditator proceeds to studying the emotional surges generated by the back essence. To do this, he first switches his attention to breathing and focuses on the process of filling hara, then he turns his attention to the movement of chi energy from hara along the spine into the ancient center of the brain, the conditional median center. However, now he directs chi energy already through the occipital area to the spherical center of the back essence, activating this center. I draw your attention to the fact that the spherical center of the back essence can rotate in different directions, both to the right, clockwise, and to the left, counterclockwise. This depends on the feelings that appear, which arise in one's memory or which dominate at that moment. They are usually connected with some past experience, a significant emotional surge during the domination of this or that essence. And this experience directly links to the activation of a certain essence at that moment, most often the left or the right, in which case the rotation of the spherical center of the back essence will be counterclockwise, or the front essence, in this case, the spherical center of the back essence will rotate clockwise. These can be feelings from the person's past or present, or various visions, depending on the power of emotional surges of the past. Sensations coming from the center of the back essence may also be different, from deadly cold to a range of warm, pleasant sensations. By the way, upon intensive spinning of the spherical center of the back essence in counterclockwise direction, what is created is, let us put it this way, favorable conditions for domination of the material thinking. This is merely physics of the multidimensional human structure. The counterclockwise rotation of the spherical center of the back essence almost always produces a feeling of longing, hopelessness, worthlessness, and skepticism, generates thoughts along the line of you're nobody, and you'll remain such until your death, of the transience of time and doom. However, if the spherical center of the back essence started spinning clockwise, this, as a rule, activates the experience of emotional surges generated by the front essence. The latter, in turn, is connected to the soul and the spiritual development of man. In this case, entirely different sensations arise from the back essence. Quite often, when the meditator practices this meditation, while in such an elevated state, he is, as if ejected from the back essence to the front essence, and the meditation continues with a totally different quality. But for now, we are talking about the standard scheme, according to which, after working with the back essence, the person stops the spinning of this spherical center also and returns with his consciousness to his conditional median center of the head. Again, he calms his thoughts and emotions, restores the state of peace, quiet, and the neutral sensation of all four essences simultaneously. Then the meditator proceeds to working with the front essence. This is the most pleasant part of the meditation. At first, as usual, we switch our attention to breathing, repeating the scheme of filling hara with chi energy through hand chakrans and the subsequent movement of this energy along the spine into the ancient center of the brain, the conditional median center. Only now chi energy goes from the center of the ancient brain through the point located in the center between the eyebrows into the spherical center of the front essence. We concentrate on the spherical center of the front essence, rotating it clockwise. At this time, one will sense a clear interconnection with the solar plexus area, or rather, with the center of the human energy structure, the soul. As for feelings, there will be a surge of energy, a sensation of comfort, pleasant warmth, joy, detachment from the material world, and contact with the spiritual world. The more the center of the front essence spins, the more one will be filled with these feelings. It is like a kind of an emotional outlet for a person. In this meditation, it is important to work with the front essence after all the others in order to acquire the state of stability, balancing of mood, and generation of a spiritual surge. It is with this comprehensive, blissful state of expanded perception that the meditator not only leaves this meditation but also preserves it in his usual state of consciousness. In this meditation, just like in life, it is important not only to stop the negative activation of the back and lateral essences but also to learn to activate your front essence and to switch to the positive state of consciousness and thinking in a timely manner. The meditator ends this meditation as usual with a self-command to himself: inhale, exhale, clench, unclench fists with force. This meditation takes 20 to 30 minutes. At the first stages, it may take a little longer for some people. It can be done in the morning and in the evening, or during the day, whichever is convenient. It helps to control the flow of thoughts and feelings and understand yourself and your emotional states. It is important not only to learn the technique itself but also to recognize your spontaneously arising emotional surges throughout a regular day. While practicing this meditation, one will be able to see its effectiveness in everyday life after one learns to understand which of his essences triggers one or another emotional and sensory surge. After all, he will then be able to timely disrupt a negative flow by stopping the activation of the centers of the back and the lateral essences and switch to the front essence, to a positive emotional surge and the corresponding mood and thinking. Figure 15. Symbolic image of the Chetvarik meditation. This meditation is like a step to subsequent development and attainment of more significant spiritual goals. It is only a tool in order for a person to learn to control himself instead of being controlled by the animal nature. Thanks to this meditation, man learns to easily orientate himself in his sensations and emotional surges, just like a good musician, for whom it is enough to only see sheet music in order to understand what the melody is and how it will sound. In daily life, such control helps one to maintain the dominance of the spiritual nature and the habit of living like a human being, according to one's conscience. Generally speaking, as they say, to always be in good shape. Anastasia, that was well said about always being in good shape. But what's interesting is that people usually associate the phrase to always be in shape with sports, or rather, with athlete training before competitions. For example, I remember that when we were just beginning to practice this meditation in our group, guys started comparing it to sports. They said that any coach is well aware of the fact that by artificially creating conditions for his mentee that are as close to reality as possible, he thus increases his chances of winning the next competition. A good athlete also knows that, despite all the difficulties of training, despite all the bruises and scratches, thanks to overcoming these obstacles, he gains experience and skills. In time, the athlete gets used to the increased daily demands towards himself. It is only from the outside that overcoming such different educational obstacles may appear as something complex and even unnecessary for the main competition. The sportsman himself is completely absorbed in the work on improving his skills. He is well aware that self-pity in training and attempts to wriggle out of the workload will definitely lead to defeat in the competition. The guys came to the conclusion that this is probably just like in this meditation for the activation of the back and lateral essences and then tracking them in everyday life when a person artificially creates all sorts of obstacles for himself and learns to overcome them. With the possible exception of one difference, here, unlike in sports, the person is his own coach, and so he sets for himself increased requirements for his vigilance. The success of such work on yourself, just like in sports, depends directly on how conscientiously the person treats it. The example is certainly clear for those who begin to practice this meditation. But what I've noticed is that people, in this case, use set templates, socially accepted guidelines as positive ones. Sport here is regarded as work on and victory over yourself and is associatively compared to spiritual work. But if we look at the root of the meaning of these processes, they are far from being one and the same concepts. Rigdon, right. These are the substitutions which few people notice at the beginning of their sports career, but which are felt quite clearly at its end. It is considered in society that if a person goes in for sports, especially elite sports, this means that he wins, first of all, over himself, meaning overcoming negative qualities and laziness, learns discipline, and so on. This is even regarded as a condition for the harmonious development of a personality. And victories in the professional sport are generally presented as the summit of human labor in self-perfection. But few people notice what global substitutions are hidden in these concepts. What do the majority of people usually associate sports with? First of all, with a game where the main thing is to win by any means. Secondly, with stadiums where a great mass of sports fans gathers together. This mass focuses all its attention on the game, which triggers a great surge of emotions in it. Besides, mind you, this surge of emotions is quite expected and planned, regardless of the result of the game. Clever people should stop and think about this, about who actually does this and for what purpose. After all, human emotions are powerful energy. A person nourishes the animal nature with his negative emotions, while a mass of people nourishes the animal mind with them. And, generally speaking, how did the professional sport appear? How did sports competitions emerge as mass entertainment? Quite often, people do not analyze even that information which they are presented in the media, not to mention an independent search of the cause of a phenomenon. The press often gives the example that the first Olympic competitions were already organized in ancient Greece. But what was the reason of their origin? Few people know that such peaceful entertainment competitions were the consequence of constant wars. The better athletically prepared the warriors of a certain side were, the better was the outcome of wars for their organizers. And this incentive of the animal nature is still reflected in the realities of the sports today. Preparing for competitions and also the very goal of becoming a champion are, in fact, based on the constant stimulation in an athlete of megalomania, egoism, and the spirit of competition. After all, the more ambitions an athlete has, the more he will practice. And this is not a matter of winning over yourself, as it is advertised everywhere. Actually, all of the personality's attention is focused on the development of skills to control its body at the necessary moment, including the use of the body's reserves and phenomenal abilities. This is just a small victory over flesh within the framework of the dominant thinking from animal nature. And for what does an athlete sacrifice himself, the time of his life, and his health? For the sake of his personal glory. And, at the same time, for the glorification of the country which provides him with various benefits and privileges in exchange for victory. But what lies behind the organization of such competitions and emotional participation in them of millions of people? What do they stimulate in people? Few people stop and think about it. And what is the end result of that same champion's career? Does he really conquer himself? No. His result is former glory, a wounded sense of pride that he has been left underappreciated by his country, and inner emptiness. For as soon as he starts having health problems or stops winning competitions, nobody needs him, which is a common occurrence in professional sport. It is inner emptiness that triggers all these negative surges. Because to win over yourself means to overcome the animal nature in yourself, this is where the attainment of spiritual harmony lies, and not in mastering to perfection some skills of controlling your physical body. Engaging in sports is wonderful, but only for the purpose of keeping your body in a healthy state, so as not to have major problems from the animal nature. But it is much more important for a person to concentrate on his spiritual component. That is the point. Anastasia, you're right. This is a problem of society, but it begins with each person. Even regarding this meditation, when a person is focused on serious daily work on himself, on his own spiritual development, in general, if he learns to be on a qualitatively different wave of perception, then his essences will begin to work differently. They will simply be switching more often to a new mode of operation of this dominant perception, manifesting, in fact, their other qualities and abilities, including the so-called phenomenal abilities of man. As they wrote in ancient Indian treatises, act but renounce the fruits of your labor. That is, act unselfishly and not out of self-love. This meditation, in my view, contains a very important aspect of understanding the nature of man and his complex structure. The meditation makes it possible to understand from personal experience the mysterious process of emergence of emotional surges and human thoughts. After all, chemical and physical processes in the brain are already a consequence of the primary izoosmos, that is, of the initial impetus of energy. I remember you making an excellent associative comparison of the function of between brain with a kind of a receiver which converts energy fluctuations, signals coming from the essences, into the subtle matter of feelings and emotions. Rigdon, if the associations related to technology are more appropriate for comprehending this process, then I can surely give such examples as well. For ease of understanding, the function of the ancient structures of the brain may be figuratively compared to a television set. By the way, the word television is derived from the Greek word tele meaning far and the Latin word visor, which stands for observer, and viso meaning eye look, vision. Or rather, to a cathode ray tube, kinescope, in the TV set which converts the electric and light signals that are invisible to the human eye into visible images in the frequency range perceived by us. In the between brain, just like in the main blocks of the analog kinescope TV set, there is, figuratively speaking, its own signal receiver. By its functions, it is conditionally similar to another device on the TV set, the channel selector, which not only amplifies but also singles out the signal of the corresponding necessary channel and then converts it to a standard intermediate frequency. Besides, there are, associatively speaking, a certain signal decoding unit, a sound and video signal detector, an intermediate frequency amplifier, an audio power amplifier, and a cathode ray tube. That is, the same physics, but at the level of subtle energy processes which take place in the human microcosm and its complex structure. The between brain is one of converters of energies into coarse matter. And the essences may be compared to television towers that broadcast their programs on various channels with the help of their transmission antennas. Let us take, for instance, the left, the right, and the back essences. For them, a person's attention to their programs is, speaking in technical language, a power supply unit, voltage amplifier of vertical and horizontal deflection, an amplifier of image channels in the form of illusions imposed upon the person, and a remote control unit of managing the person and his mood. So either a thriller about his own pride appears in the person's head, or a horror movie made of his own fears, or a melodrama titled The Wailing Wall about the lost past. That is, these essences will very skillfully draw any plausible illusion, make a mountain out of a molehill, and force the person to deeply experience different negative emotions while using his own, so valuable for his spiritual development, attention. However, if the person switches to perceiving the television broadcasting of his front essence, he will be able to see and feel an entirely different perception of the world, one that is useful for his spiritual growth. For example, a documentary about real life and about the inner spiritual world which is reflected in the outer. Thanks to such a contact and empathy, the personality receives a powerful positive charge which allows it to concentrate all its attention in the spiritual direction. The truth is that after such a film, the regular human life will seem sheer acting. So, it only depends on the person, what he will give attention to in his head and which signals he will receive and amplify. Figuratively speaking, the person holds in his own hands not only the remote control of his TV set but also the opportunity to control all the television towers along with their TV and radio companies. Moreover, thanks to this meditation technique, a person will be able to understand both himself and other people. When you are able to clearly identify in yourself the moments connected with activation of one or another essence, it will be easy for you to also feel a hidden influence upon you by other people. How? For example, you are talking to a person or listening to certain information on television or radio. At the moment of the conversation or receiving information from an external source, you simply focus on your neutral median position as an observer surrounded by your four essences. Or rather, you enter into the state of the observer that is detached from circumstances and trace in yourself which of your essences is activated by this information. After all, besides verbal exchange of information between people, there is also an interaction of their essences. Thanks to such tracking of the influence of this information on you, you will understand what has been the original emotional foundation of it and for what actual hidden purpose it is being communicated to you. For example, if your interlocutor is telling lies or practices deceit, your left essence will definitely be activated. If he provokes aggression in you, the center of your right essence will start spinning. And if he awakens in you a surge of positive emotions, love, and good, then your front essence activates. Thus, you can follow the real situation and not that illusion which is being constantly imposed upon you from the visible and the invisible worlds for the purpose of controlling your consciousness. Anastasia, yes, if many people master this meditation technique, the need to lie and control each other will disappear in society. There will be no point in it, for everyone will know the truth about each other. Rigdon, that is so. But this will happen only if the majority of people in society want to change for the better. Then, humanity will have a chance to follow an entirely different, a qualitatively new way of civilized spiritual development. But what will modern mankind choose? That is the question. After all, this meditation technique had been given to people previously. Moreover, it was brought into the life of society at different times. I would not say it was given in such detail, but it was quite understandable for the thinking of people of those days. But people are people, and many of them, unfortunately, enjoy modernizing and complicating the pure knowledge and the simple truth. Nevertheless, echoes of this practice can still be found in the secret knowledge of different nations of the world. Only today, it has been camouflaged to the point of absurdity into the rituals that are accompanied by singing, dancing, and fancy shows with tambourines and drums. And all this is done for the purpose of switching into an altered state of consciousness for a disciple or a priest and listen to a talking spirit from the right or the left side and so on. Although while doing this practice in its pure form, such complexities are not needed, this is all human, superficial. Here, at first stages, you simply learn to reconfigure the perception of consciousness and track and control your states. And later there are simply working moments. Generally speaking, I should note that since ancient times such basic spiritual practices related to the fundamental knowledge and human spiritual growth have, as a rule, been recorded in certain signs and symbols. Anastasia, signs and symbols are a special topic. If possible, it would be desirable to hear about them from you personally in more detail and to provide readers with this valuable information. Since ancient times, the history of mankind has nearly always been surrounded by signs and symbols. But after extensively searching for information about them in the libraries of different cities and on the internet, I came to a disappointing conclusion that signs and symbols are present in every historical epoch, but the knowledge about them has either been lost or the deciphering of their meaning has been so grossly distorted that hardly any truth has remained. There is no primordial spiritual knowledge about signs which you have communicated. What is available to ordinary people nowadays? At best, there are dictionaries of symbols, books of dubious content given in the interpretation of Freemasons about the paraphernalia of occult teachings. Scientists dissociate themselves from such interpretations because they understand what lies at the root of such publications. At the same time, science has already accumulated very rich material about graphical symbols and signs specific to ancient archaeological cultures of various continents and times. Many of the magical ritual signs which were considered important in the spiritual culture of different nations are identical. But so far, scientists have been unable to decipher them fully. Now I understand why. Even what you told us in this respect gave me an entirely different understanding of the picture of the world and the knowledge about the human being. While reading works about graphical symbols of archaeological cultures, articles on ethnography, folklore, mythology, and cosmogony in the representation of different nations, I came to the conclusion that scientists are lacking exactly this link. That very key to deciphering signs in order to connect, understand, and read this unique information which is spiritual wealth of mankind. Rigdon, yes, unfortunately, despite the abundance of ancient signs and symbols in modern society, much of the knowledge about them has really been lost by people, that is a fact. But this is not surprising. The problem is in people, in the society itself, starting with an individual and his dominant desires and ending with priorities of the human society. Just look at the history of mankind, continuous wars, a constant struggle for religious and political power and, worst of all, withholding from the majority of people the true spiritual knowledge which leads to real freedom of the personality and liberation of the soul. Why was the primordial knowledge concealed from the majority? Why was it distorted beyond recognition and then also interpreted from one's own mind mired in the materialistic thinking? Why was this information eradicated from the consciousness of new generations and buried in oblivion for millennia? Simply because this primordial knowledge made it possible for people to develop themselves spiritually on their own, independent of those same politicians and priests who to this day call themselves intermediaries between people and gods. This knowledge made people free, independent of the structures of political and religious power. It allowed nations to unite independently. After all, it is very difficult to control spiritually free people, even more so to try to impose on them discord, fear, aggression, and other guidelines from the animal mind. Anastasia, I totally agree with you that the problem is indeed in people themselves and in the society they form, as well as in the prevalence of disunity and fragmentation in relationships between people. Even if we take details. For instance, while looking into scientific research regarding ancient signs, even a superficial study of the problems set forth in these works makes you wonder at the wall of artificial obstacles which have to be faced by those who try to get to the heart of the truth today. Under what conditions do scientists have to do their work, say, in ethnology, ethnography, archaeology, and ancient history? Everything is done on sheer enthusiasm, and for meager wages. At that, in their work, they are faced with numerous bureaucratic or financial obstacles, lack of organization and coordination in attracting specialists from related disciplines for a more in-depth complex study of various matters. Or often they simply face the conspiracy of silence, the so-called in the world scientific taboo on certain topics or findings. Not to mention the situation on the global scale when in many cases obstacles are created artificially to prevent access to certain information or unique archaeological findings which, in fact, are being hidden from people. Naturally, all this happens not without the involvement of certain interested parties. Such information is either not brought to the attention of a wider scientific community, being left in depositories to collect dust, or significant artifacts end up in private collections, or they are even completely removed by secret services and disappear into thin air. Probably someone is very afraid that this information will shake the ideology and the foundation of somebody's power which is profitable for controlling the contemporary nations. So all honor to those scientists who, in spite of all the obstacles, continue to work selflessly in this field of science and to inform nations about significant findings which destroy the illusion of savagery of the ancient peoples and which often testify to the priority of spiritual values and knowledge in those distant times. But with all this, still, the question arises, why does the society itself remain silent? After all, it is society that should be interested in its spiritual past. In the first place, in order to understand and correctly determine the vector of its future. Rigdon, it is silent because the consciousness of the majority of people has been thus processed with the behavior templates of consumer material thinking to such an extent that an ordinary person cannot comprehend even the formulation of this question itself. When his thinking is blinkered by such guidelines and templates, he simply does not understand why, As a matter of fact, these scientific professions should have a greater priority for society and the state than, for instance, the profession of nanotechnologist, who deals with research at the atomic and molecular level, or of financial analyst, or physicist dealing with new types of weapons. But the rub is that all the researchers, which you mentioned above, of such professions which are disrespected in many countries and which are related to studying antiquity and the culture of different peoples, as a priority for themselves, put the super objective, apart from addressing current scientific issues, of no less than reconstructing all the sides of the spiritual life of society. And who among those in power will like this? After all, if the masses know for certain what the ordinary people just like themselves sought millennia ago, what world outlook and sacred, spiritual knowledge they had, how they perfected themselves, and what they devoted their lives to, then the question will arise, where is modern mankind heading to and why this knowledge has been concealed from the majority for millennia? After all, how is the human of today different from the human of the past? The difference is only in a slight change of external conditions of existence, but the internal problems, the struggle between the spiritual nature and the animal nature have remained the same. Moreover, such large-scale scientific work on the reconstruction of the spiritual side of society's life implies the decryption of the core sacred meanings and key symbol-creating motives in different cultures and worldviews. And that means that it entails obtaining scientific evidence of the importance of the role that practically one and the same signs and symbols played for different peoples of the world, in different periods of social formations, regardless of geographic remoteness and isolated habitation of such nations on different continents. Signs and symbols have existed in the human society from the very beginning. They are still present now in the modern world, regardless of the fact that most people do not understand their meaning and the power of influence they exert. You yourself already know perfectly well, thanks to meditative experience, how some signs and symbols affect the physics of the visible and the invisible worlds. Signs and symbols are the keys to the spiritual treasury of the human society. This is a code to the complex processes which reveal secrets of controlling advanced physics as well as new horizons of scientific knowledge. Anastasia, yes, knowing this, one is able to understand what powers each human being possesses by achieving certain levels of self-improvement. However, this imposes a great responsibility as well. Rigdon, undoubtedly. But people remain people, even having the knowledge about the power and the significance of signs and symbols, they distorted it with time, added something, and complicated it at their own discretion. As a result, what some people knew at the beginning of a millennium and others at its end was clearly different in meaning and qualitatively different in content. But from time to time this knowledge was renewed in the human society. Some cultures had vanished, taking the sacred secrets to the grave, while others, on the contrary, had formed and blossomed out of the remains of previous generations' knowledge. So, the presence of this knowledge in its primordial form has always been topical for any peoples living in different parts of the globe, for it would not simply give a key to the knowledge of their ancestors but also considerably expand their own cognition in the field of spiritual self-development. In the modern world, one can find entire systems of their own traditional symbols and signs with any nation. However, the primordial knowledge about them has been lost. Even the very names of symbols and signs are no longer connected in the semantic interpretation with the secret knowledge about the human being. They mostly represent a notion of a certain value in science and also have an everyday conditional meaning which characterizes one or another manifestation of the material world.